What if AI is helping us so much that we slowly stop using the habits that made us intelligent to begin with? You open AI, ask one question, and suddenly the struggle disappears. Because AI does not feel harmful when you use it. It feels helpful, fast, clear, and even comforting. The blank page feels less intimidating. The uncertainty drops. The friction disappears. But that may be the real risk. Because if AI keeps stepping in before your mind does the hard part, you may still sound smart on the outside, while slowly doing less of the thinking that made you sharp in the first place. And personally, I think that is the part people miss. The danger may not look like failure. It may look like relief. You still function well. You still produce good work. You still sound intelligent. But underneath that smooth surface, your mind may be practicing less than it used to. And this is where the whole thing starts to feel familiar. For most people, this does not begin with a dramatic dependence on AI. It begins with something small, a quick calculation, a paragraph you want rewritten, an email you have written 100 times before, a summary of something you could easily read yourself. That is why it slips by so easily. It doesn't feel like you're losing anything. It feels like you're being efficient. And that may be the most deceptive part of all. At first, AI just feels useful. Then it starts to feel relieving. You ask a question, the uncertainty drops, and the answer comes back fast, clear, and confident. For a moment, your mind relaxes. And that is where this stops looking like simple convenience and starts looking more like a psychological pattern. Sometimes people are not turning to AI because they truly need new information. They're turning to it because they want the discomfort of not knowing to disappear. And once that feeling becomes familiar, AI stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like the fastest way out of mental effort. And that is where the real paradox begins. Because AI really does help. It makes people faster, more efficient, and often more productive. Many users even say it improves creativity. So this is not about pretending AI has no value. The value is obvious. And honestly, that's what makes this so easy to accept at first. The problem is that the very thing that makes AI so useful may also make it risky. The easier it becomes to hand off part of your thinking, the less often you have to do that part yourself. And at first, that sounds harmless. I thought the same thing. It just felt like removing friction, nothing more. But thinking is not just about getting an answer. It is also about practicing the process that gets you there. That is what makes this different from a simple tool. AI does not just give you the result. It can organize your thoughts, shape your argument, and hand back a cleaner version of what you were trying to say. And the more I noticed that happening, the more uncomfortable it started to feel. And when that happens often enough, the question is no longer just whether the output is good, it becomes something more unsettling. What happens to a mind that no longer has to do as much of the work on its own? That question leads to something researchers call cognitive offloading. In simple terms, it means handing mental work to an external tool instead of doing it yourself. And this is not new. People have been doing it with calculators, reminders, search engines, and notes for years. What makes AI different is how much further into the thinking process it can go. It doesn't just store information for you. It can retrieve, summarize, structure, rephrase, and even shape your reasoning before you fully form it yourself. And that is what makes us feel different from older tools. It's not just about helping after you think. It can start stepping in before your thinking is fully finished. And that's the part I didn't expect. Because it doesn't feel like you're avoiding thinking, it feels like you're just moving faster. Research in these materials points to something called reminder bias, the tendency to rely on external aids even when your own memory would probably be enough. In other words, even when you could do it yourself, you often don't. Even when people are encouraged to trust themselves more, many still choose the easier external option. And that is where this becomes more than convenience. Because the risk is not worth saving effort once.
The risk is repeating that choice so often that it becomes your default. You think you might forget, so you set the reminder. You think AI can say it better, so you let it. I've caught myself doing this more than I'd like to admit. And over time, the brain may stop practicing the very abilities it keeps handing away.
And that is where this starts to matter even more. Because the concern here is not just that AI saves time. The deeper concern is what repeated offloading may do to the development of intelligence itself. One of the strongest ideas in these materials is that knowledge is not separate from thinking. It is part of what makes deep thinking possible in the first place. And that idea stuck with me. That matters because real expertise does not come from simply knowing where to find information. It depends on having enough information already available in your mind to connect ideas, make judgments, and reason in real time. A doctor, or a teacher, or a lawyer does not stop in the middle of every thought to look up what matters most. Their thinking works because so much of the relevant knowledge is already present and usable. And when you see it that way, the role of effort starts to look very different. And that may be one of the most important points in this entire conversation. When AI keeps stepping in too early, it may not just help you finish the task. It may reduce how often your mind has to build the deeper structure behind the task. That is why these materials do not frame the issue as simple laziness. They frame it as a developmental risk. If a person repeatedly lets AI handle the work of phrasing, organizing, retrieving, or working through a problem, the final result may still look polished. It may even look impressive. And that's where this becomes harder to notice. But some of the underlying mental architecture may not get built the same way. And that is what makes this risk so hard to detect. Because from the outside, nothing looks broken. The person may still sound sharp, still work fast, still produces strong results. But output can stay high, even while the mind is practicing less of the work that once made that output possible. And this is where the argument becomes even more uncomfortable. Because the people most at risk may not be the least capable, they may be the most capable. One of the central ideas in these materials is that intelligent people face a strange dilemma with AI. They are often the quickest to recognize how powerful it is. They know how to integrate it into their workflow. They know how to use it efficiently. And that is exactly why the risk can become harder for them to notice. A strong student can use AI to produce excellent essays. A talented programmer can use it to generate working code faster. A skilled professional can use it to structure ideas, refine language, and expedite decision-making. On the surface, all of that can look like an advantage, and in many ways, it is. But that may be the trap. The more capable you are, the easier it becomes to believe you are still fully in control of the thinking process, even when more of that process is being quietly handed off. That is where another idea from these materials becomes especially important. Experts may believe they are carefully verifying AI output, but over time, they may stop noticing that their sense of what sounds right is already being shaped by the model itself. So the danger here is not just dependence, it is overconfidence. It is the possibility that smart people may be the least likely to notice when AI is no longer just helping them think, but slowly teaching them what thinking should sound like. And that may be where the deepest shift begins. Because one of the most unsettling ideas in these materials is that AI does not just help people express their thoughts. It can also shape what those thoughts become. A person may speak loosely, write messily, or enter a rough idea into AI. Then the model returns something cleaner, more structured, and more persuasive. And the response feels familiar. It feels right. It feels like, yes, that is exactly what I meant. But that is where the line starts to blur. Because recognizing something is not the same as creating it. Approving a polished version of your thought is not the same as originating the structure behind it. And that may be one of the quietest ways AI changes the mind. Not by forcing ideas onto people,
but by making borrowed structure feel like native thought. That is why these materials draw such a strong distinction between approval and authorship. The wording may feel like yours, the meaning may feel close enough to claim, but the sequencing, framing, and emphasis may have been shaped by the model before you ever fully formed them yourself. And if that happens often enough, the risk is not just a better expression. The risk is slowly losing the ability to tell where your thinking ends and the model begins. And that is what makes this so hard to resist. Because AI is not only useful, it is rewarding. These materials point out that people often return to AI not just for information, but for reassurance. They want uncertainty to drop. They want clarity, confirmation, and that quick feeling of mental relief. And once you notice that, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. That matters because the brain does not need a huge reward to learn a habit. Sometimes relief is enough, a fast answer, a clearer thought, a polished response at exactly the right moment. And over time, the mind starts learning something simple. When I feel uncertain, this helps. I've felt that shift myself, not because I needed the answer, but because I wanted the uncertainty to disappear. And that may be what makes this cycle so powerful. AI is not just saving effort, it is training comfort. So the more often a person turns to it in moments of doubt, stress, or mental friction, the more natural that return can start to feel. And at a certain point, it stops feeling like a choice. Once a tool becomes linked to relief, people don't just use it more. They begin to lean on it.
And once that dependence starts to feel natural, a deeper question emerges. Not just why people keep coming back to AI, but what that repeated return may be doing to the mind over time. Because the real risk may not be sudden decline. It may be something much quieter than that. These materials suggest that when cognitive work is repeatedly handed off, some of the habits behind deep thinking may simply get practiced less. So the loss, if it happens, may not look dramatic. It may look like someone who still sounds smart, still works fast, and still produces polished results, but no longer thinks as independently, as patiently, or as deeply as they once could have. And that may be the hardest part to notice, because the surface can keep improving while the inner process quietly weakens. So maybe the deepest question is not whether AI is making people stupid. Maybe it is whether AI is slowly reducing the frequency with which people do the very mental work that builds judgment, originality, and intellectual strength. And if that is true, then the greatest loss may not be performance. It may be the version of your mind that never fully gets built. So maybe the question is not whether AI should be used. It clearly will be. The real question is what parts of your mind you are slowly asking it to replace. Because a tool can help you think, yet make you rely on it more than you realize. And that's something I've started paying more attention to myself. And that may be the line worth watching. Not whether AI gives good answers, but whether you are still doing enough of the hard thinking to remain fully your own. Maybe next time you open AI, just pause for a moment before you ask. Not to avoid it, but to notice why you're using it. So what do you think? Is AI sharpening your mind or slowly making you depend on it more than you notice?